The Memphis sun felt soft that afternoon, the kind that makes everything look warmer than it really is. 8-year-old Zaria Washington skipped across the parking lot beside her Aunt Kesha, her braids bouncing with every step. She had insisted on wearing her favorite yellow t-shirt, the one with tiny sunflowers stitched across the front because, as she told her mum that morning, sunflowers don't get scared of the dark. Kesha laughed, just thinking about it. "Slow down, superstar," Kesha called gently, adjusting her purse as Zaria spun in a small circle near the entrance of Parkview convenience store. "You're gonna trip before we even get inside." "I won't trip." Zaria grinned confidently. "Mommy says I'm brave and balanced." There was something about the way she said, "Mommy," that always carried pride. Vanessa Wright wasn't just her mother, she was her hero. Even though Zaria didn't fully understand what her mom did at Fort Liberty, she knew it was important. She knew it meant people listened when her mother spoke, and in Zaria's mind, that meant her mom could fix almost anything. Inside the store, the air conditioning hummed softly. The place smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning solution. Zaria made a straight line for the candy aisle, like she had rehearsed it 100 times in her head. "Auntie Kesha," she whispered dramatically, glancing back as if sharing a top-secret mission. "The rainbow sour ones." "The big pack." Kesha smiled, leaning against a nearby shelf. "You and those sour candies. One day your tongue's gonna turn permanently red." Zaria giggled and reached up on her toes, stretching her small fingers toward the brightly colored package sitting just out of reach. For a moment, everything was normal. Just a little girl chasing sweetness in a world that still felt safe. A woman stood a few feet away in the next aisle, middle-aged, well-dressed, scanning the shelves with sharp, impatient movements. She glanced over briefly. Her eyes lingered longer than necessary. Zaria didn't notice. She finally grabbed the candy and turned around proudly. "Got him!" And then, a loud gasp sliced through the quiet store. "My purse!" the woman shouted, her voice rising with sudden panic. "It's gone!" The cashier looked up from behind the counter, startled. The room seemed to tighten, like the air had shifted. The woman's eyes moved quickly, scanning, calculating before settling directly on Kesha and Zaria. "You," she said, pointing. "You took it." The words hung heavy in the air. Kesha blinked, confused. "Excuse me? My purse was right here," the woman insisted. "And now it's gone. You people just walked in." Zaria frowned, looking up at her aunt. "Auntie, what's she talking about?" Kesha instinctively stepped closer to her niece. "Ma'am, we just came in for candy. We haven't touched anything of yours." But the woman wasn't listening anymore. She had already made her decision. The cashier reached for the phone without asking questions. Zaria's small fingers tightened around the candy bag. Her eyes searched her aunt's face, trying to understand what was happening. "Did I do something bad?" she whispered quietly. Kesha knelt down quickly, brushing a braid away from Zaria's forehead. "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong." Outside, faint but growing louder, came the distant sound of sirens. Zaria had heard sirens before. They usually meant someone needed help. Fire trucks, ambulances. But today, as the sound grew closer, something in her chest didn't feel right. The woman crossed her arms, staring coldly. "They'll figure it out." The store felt smaller now. The bright candy wrappers didn't look as colorful. The hum of the air conditioning seemed too loud. Zaria swallowed hard. She didn't understand why the woman was looking at her that way. She didn't understand why the room suddenly felt heavy. All she knew was that the sunshine outside no longer felt warm, and the sirens were getting closer. The sirens didn't sound urgent at first. They weren't screaming like in the movies. They were distant controlled, but as they grew louder, the air inside the store shifted completely. Zaria stood very still, the oversized candy bag pressed against her chest. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears now. She didn't understand what was happening, only that every adult in the room was suddenly tense. The woman who had accused them didn't look scared anymore. She looked certain, and that certainty was heavier than the accusation itself. Kesha stood tall, trying to keep her voice calm. "Ma'am, please check your car. Maybe you left it there." "I know where I left my purse," the woman snapped sharply. "Don't try to be clever." The cashier avoided eye contact. Instead of asking questions, instead of reviewing cameras, instead of thinking, he simply waited. That waiting said everything. Zaria tugged gently at her aunt's sleeve. "Auntie, can we just go?" Kesha looked toward the door. 2 security guards had stepped inside, positioning themselves casually but not casually enough. They weren't blocking the exit directly. They were just standing in a way that made leaving impossible. "Police are on their way," one of them said, not looking at Zaria, not looking at Kesha, just stating it like a fact already decided. The sirens stopped outside. Through the glass windows, red and blue lights flickered across the candy shelves, casting strange colors on Zaria's sunflower shirt. Her breathing became shallow. "I didn't take anything," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I know, baby," Kesha whispered. "I know." The door opened with a firm push. Officer Brent Reynolds stepped inside first. Tall, broad shoulders, controlled posture. His partner, Officer Thomas Miller, followed close behind, scanning the room with a practiced expression. "What seems to be the problem?" Reynolds asked. He directed the question toward the white woman, not toward Kesha, not toward the child. The woman pointed immediately. "They took my purse. I had it right there. They're the only ones who walked in." Reynolds didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for proof. He didn't review footage. He looked at Kesha and Zaria, and something hardened in his face. "Ma'am, step aside," he said to Kesha. Zaria felt her aunt's hand tighten around hers. "She's 8 years old," Kesha said carefully. "We didn't steal anything." Miller stepped closer. "We'll sort that out." The words sounded neutral, but the tone wasn't. Zaria looked up at Officer Reynolds. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't kind. He wasn't curious. He was already convinced. The look in his eyes wasn't confusion. It was suspicion. And that look changed everything. "Come here," Miller said, reaching gently but firmly for Zaria's arm. She flinched. "I want my auntie," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "It's okay," Kesha said quickly. "Don't touch her without me." Reynolds stepped between them. "Ma'am, if you cooperate, this will go faster." Cooperate. As if they had done something. As if innocence required negotiation. Zaria's eyes filled with tears. She didn't understand what was happening. She only knew she felt small, smaller than she had ever felt before. Outside, a few people had gathered, watching through the glass. Phones were already coming out. "Did I do something wrong?" Zaria asked again, this time louder. The question echoed through the store. No one answered her. Instead, Officer Miller began guiding her toward the door. That's when fear replaced confusion. Her grip slipped from Kesha's hand, and for the first time in her life, Zaria realized that being brave didn't always mean being safe. She twisted suddenly, trying to run back to the only place that still felt secure, her aunt's arms. And in that split second, everything spiraled out of control. It happened in less than 3 seconds. Zaria twisted free from Officer Miller's grip, her small sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as she ran toward her aunt. "Auntie," she cried. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't aggression. It was fear. But fear looks different depending on who's watching. Officer Brent Reynolds didn't see a terrified child running toward safety. He saw movement, and in his mind, movement meant resistance. "Stop," he barked. The command came sharp and loud, slicing through the room. Zaria froze for half a heartbeat, but she didn't understand what she had done wrong. She only knew she wanted her aunt. Reynolds moved fast. Too fast. The baton came up in a smooth, practiced motion. A motion trained for grown men twice her size. A motion meant for threat control. Not for an 8-year-old girl. The sound was sickening. A dull, heavy crack that didn't belong in a place that smelled like coffee and candy. Zaria's small body crumpled instantly. The candy bag slipped from her hands, bursting open as bright pieces scattered across the floor like tiny pieces of shattered normalcy. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, Kesha screamed. "Zaria!" She lunged forward, but Officer Miller grabbed her arms from behind, forcing her down. "Get on the ground, now!" "She's a child," Kesha sobbed. "She's just a baby." Blood began to trickle through Zaria's braids, dark and terrifying against her sunflower shirt. Her eyes fluttered, confused. She didn't understand why the world had tilted sideways. "I want my mummy," she whispered weakly. The words broke something in the room. A woman near the entrance gasped, pulling out her phone. "That's a little girl." A man stepped forward. "I'm a doctor. Let me help her." Reynolds blocked him without hesitation. "Step back." This is a police matter. A police matter. The phrase echoed strangely against the reality of a bleeding child on the floor. Behind the counter, the cashier's face had gone pale. The accusing woman who had started it all now looked unsure, her confidence cracking. "Maybe I left it in my car," she muttered faintly, but it was too late. A store manager rushed forward, breathless. "Officer." We checked the parking cameras. The purse was in her vehicle the whole time. Reynolds didn't respond immediately. Instead, he keyed his radio calmly. "Suspect injured, requesting medical assistance." Suspect. The word felt heavier than the Baton ever could. Zaria's breathing grew shallow, her vision blurred as tears mixed with blood. The lights above her looked too bright. She wasn't thinking about Candy anymore. She wasn't thinking about bravery. She was thinking about her mother. "Mommy," she murmured again, voice fading. Outside, sirens returned this time for an ambulance. Inside, phones kept recording, and Officer Reynolds stood there, baton still in his hand, staring at the little girl who had only wanted rainbow candy. He had acted without asking a single question. And now, the consequences of that single swing were just beginning. Fort Liberty moved with rhythm and order, every step timed, every command deliberate. Inside a secure operations room, Colonel Vanessa Wright stood at the head of a long steel table, satellite images glowing on the screen behind her. 24 officers watched as she outlined the final phase of a classified operation. "Extraction begins at 0200 hours, she said, laser steady in her hand. "Team Alpha secures the perimeter. Team Bravo moves only on confirmed signal." Her voice carried calm authority. Not loud, not dramatic, just controlled. The kind of control that comes from years of leading under pressure. Vanessa had built her career on precision. She had learned early that hesitation cost lives. Emotion clouded judgment. Discipline saved it. That belief had shaped her into one of the most respected commanders on base. The door opened quietly. Captain Marcus Davis stepped inside, something unusual in his expression. He didn't interrupt her briefings unless absolutely necessary. "Colonel," he said carefully, "secure line 3. It's urgent." The room shifted. Vanessa paused, sensing the weight in his tone. She handed the laser to her second-in-command without comment. "Continue Section 4. I'll return shortly." She walked into the adjacent communications room, the door sealing shut behind her. "Colonel Wright," she answered. The voice on the other end was shaky. Female. Strained. "Colonel, my name is Tanya Martinez. I'm at Parkview Convenience Store with your sister. The police, they hurt your daughter." Vanessa didn't move. They hit Zaria with a baton. "She's bleeding. They're taking her to Memphis General." For 3 full seconds, the world went silent. Vanessa had stood in war zones. She had received casualty reports over radio static. She had watched situations fall apart in real time without blinking. But this was different. This wasn't a soldier. This wasn't a mission. This was her child. "Is she conscious?" Vanessa asked evenly. She was for a moment. "She kept asking for you." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, one controlled inhale filling her lungs. "Stay with my sister," she said. "I'm on my way." She hung up and immediately dialed another number. "General Phillips. This is Colonel Wright. I have a family emergency requiring immediate leave." 10 minutes later, she was in her vehicle. Captain Davis drove without speaking. He had seen her in combat situations, but he had never seen her this quiet. "Hospital?" he asked softly. Vanessa stared ahead, jaw tight. "Police station first." Davis glanced at her, understanding immediately. "They hit her," she said, voice lower now. "They handcuffed my sister. I need to know exactly who did this." There was no panic in her tone, no shouting, just cold resolve. As they drove, flashes of memory crossed her mind. Zaria that morning, proudly adjusting her sunflower shirt. "Mommy, I'm brave." Vanessa's grip tightened slightly on her phone. Bravery. Her daughter had believed bravery meant the world would treat her fairly. Vanessa knew better. The police station came into view, a simple brick building that had no idea what was walking toward it. When the car stopped, Vanessa didn't rush. She adjusted her uniform jacket, straightened her insignia. Her composure wasn't armor. It was strategy. Inside, the station's normal chatter slowed as she entered. Officers glanced up, registering the rank immediately. The desk sergeant cleared his throat. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Vanessa's voice carried clearly across the room. "I am Colonel Vanessa Wright. You are currently detaining my sister under false pretenses." A beat of silence, and one of your officers struck my 8-year-old daughter with a baton. The words settled into the room like a controlled explosion. "You will release my sister immediately," she continued, eyes steady, "and you will direct me to Officers Brent Reynolds and Thomas Miller." She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to, because the officers in that room were just beginning to realize the child they had treated like a suspect had a mother who commanded battalions. The station had grown unusually quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from discipline. It was the kind that comes from discomfort. Colonel Vanessa Wright stood in the center of the lobby, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. The polished floor reflected the sharp lines of her uniform. Every medal, every insignia, every detail communicated authority without her needing to say another word. Behind the desk, the sergeant cleared his throat nervously. "Ma'am, I'll need to get the watch commander." "Do that," Vanessa replied calmly. Before the call could even be completed, a door to the back offices opened. Officer Brent Reynolds stepped out first. His baton was still clipped to his belt. A faint dark stain marked the metal. Vanessa's eyes locked onto it immediately. Behind him, Officer Thomas Miller escorted Kesha forward, her wrists still cuffed. Her face was tear-streaked, but when she saw her sister, relief washed over her. "Nessa," she started. "Remove those handcuffs," Vanessa said evenly. The command wasn't loud, but something in her tone left no room for argument. Miller hesitated only a second before unlocking them. Kesha rubbed her wrists, shaking. Reynolds stepped forward, chin raised slightly. "Your sister interfered with an active investigation." Vanessa didn't look at him yet. She was examining the baton. "My daughter is 8 years old," she said quietly. "She was buying candy." Reynolds shifted. "She fled when we attempted to question her. Under protocol, I responded to a perceived threat." Now Vanessa turned her full attention to him. A perceived threat. Her eyes didn't flash with rage. They sharpened. "Officer Reynolds, I want you to explain clearly the protocol that authorizes striking an unarmed 8-year-old child in the head with a metal baton." Reynolds opened his mouth, then paused. "The suspect was resisting," he insisted. "She was running to her aunt," Vanessa corrected. "She could have been reaching for what?" Vanessa's voice lowered further. "Rainbow candy?" A few officers nearby shifted uncomfortably. Chief Richard Wilson hurried in, adjusting his tie. "Colonel Wright, I understand there's been an unfortunate misunderstanding." "This is not a misunderstanding," Vanessa interrupted smoothly. "This is aggravated assault on a minor." Wilson's smile faded. Vanessa continued, her words deliberate and precise. "Security footage confirms no theft occurred. Witnesses recorded the incident from multiple angles. Medical reports document significant head trauma. Your officer radioed my unconscious daughter as a suspect." Wilson swallowed. "We will conduct a thorough internal investigation," he offered. "No," Vanessa replied. The word landed heavier than anything else she had said. "This will not be handled internally." The room felt smaller. "My legal team is en route. Representatives from the Department of Justice have been notified. All body camera footage, dispatch logs, surveillance recordings, and internal communications will be preserved immediately." Wilson's face paled slightly. "That's highly irregular." "What's irregular," Vanessa said softly, stepping closer, "is striking a child and calling it protocol." For the first time, Reynolds' confidence cracked. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," he muttered. Vanessa met his gaze steadily. "You made it bigger when you swung that baton." Silence. Kesha's breathing trembled behind her. Vanessa didn't shout. She didn't threaten recklessly. She outlined consequences. "Within 36 hours, she continued, "I expect full cooperation. If not, I will initiate a comprehensive federal review of this department's use of force history involving minors and racial profiling patterns." Wilson blinked. "You don't have the authority to—" "I have the resources," Vanessa corrected, "and now I have the motivation." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vanessa turned slightly toward her sister. "We're going to the hospital." As she walked toward the exit, she paused just long enough to look back at Reynolds. There was no anger in her eyes now, just certainty. "You didn't just hit my daughter," she said quietly. You awakened her mother, and for the first time since the baton swung, Officer Brent Reynolds looked unsure of himself. Memphis General Hospital smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. The bright white hallway lights felt too harsh, too unforgiving. Colonel Vanessa Wright walked through them with controlled steps, but inside, her thoughts were anything but steady. Kesha walked beside her, quieter now, replaying the moment over and over in her head. "There was so much blood," Kesha whispered. "She kept asking for you." Vanessa nodded once. She had faced battlefield briefings with less tension in her chest than she felt now approaching her daughter's hospital room. A nurse stopped them gently. "Are you the mother?" "Yes." The nurse's expression softened. "She's stable. But the head injury was serious. The doctor will explain everything." Stable. It was a word Vanessa had used in combat reports. It usually meant temporary safety, not certainty. The door to the room opened slowly. Zaria looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. Half her head was wrapped in bandages. A faint bruise darkened the skin near her temple. Machines beeped softly beside her, monitoring rhythms that should have been carefree and childish, not medically supervised. For a moment, Vanessa couldn't move. She had trained herself for years to compartmentalize. Fear went in one box, anger in another, grief somewhere deeper. But this wasn't a soldier under her command. This was her baby. She stepped closer, sitting carefully beside the bed. "Hey, Sunflower," she said gently. Zaria's eyes fluttered open slowly. They were confused at first. Then they focused. "Mommy," she whispered. Vanessa leaned forward immediately, brushing her fingers lightly over her daughter's hand. "I'm here," Zaria swallowed. "Am I in trouble?" The question pierced deeper than any accusation in the police station. Vanessa felt her throat tighten. "No," she said firmly but softly. "You didn't do anything wrong." Zaria blinked slowly. "The police said I wasn't listening." Vanessa inhaled carefully, steadying herself. "You were scared," she replied. "And that's okay." The doctor entered quietly, a calm, middle-aged neurologist holding a tablet. "Colonel Wright," she began, "your daughter sustained a moderate traumatic brain injury. There's a linear skull fracture and swelling, but we've managed the pressure. She'll need observation for several days." Vanessa listened without interruption. "Will there be permanent damage?" she asked. "We're hopeful for a full physical recovery," the doctor answered carefully. "But we're concerned about psychological trauma. Being struck by an authority figure at her age can leave lasting emotional effects." Vanessa nodded once. "Whatever care she needs, she'll receive." When the doctor left, the room fell quiet again, except for the steady beeping of the monitor. Zaria shifted slightly. "Mommy, why did he hit me?" There was no easy answer. Vanessa chose honesty, but gently shaped for an 8-year-old heart. "Sometimes," she said softly, "people make bad decisions when they don't understand others." Zaria's brow furrowed. "But I was just getting candy." "I know." Tears gathered at the corners of Vanessa's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Not yet." Zaria squeezed her hand weakly. "You always fix things." The weight of that belief settled heavily. Vanessa had fixed operations, strategies, conflicts overseas. But fixing this meant confronting something larger than one officer. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They picked the wrong child," she whispered gently. "Because they forgot one thing." Zaria looked up at her. "They forgot you have a mother who doesn't quit." For the first time since the hospital room door opened, Vanessa allowed herself a quiet, controlled tear. Not of weakness, but of promise. Because this fight was no longer just about accountability. It was about making sure no other child ever asked, "Am I in trouble?" when they were the ones who had been hurt. The hospital room was quiet, but across Memphis, silence didn't mean peace. It meant preparation. Inside a polished downtown office, Police Chief Richard Wilson sat at the head of a long conference table. The blinds were half closed, muting the afternoon light. Across from him sat Officer Brent Reynolds, jaw tight, arms crossed defensively. Beside them, Senator Graham Wells adjusted his cufflinks with practiced calm. "This situation escalated faster than anticipated," the senator said evenly. "The colonel isn't following the usual pattern." Wilson exhaled. "Most families hire a lawyer and wait for a settlement. She's contacting the Department of Justice." Reynolds scoffed. She's overreacting. The kid ran. The room went still. Senator Wells leaned forward slightly. Officer Reynolds, that kid, is now the center of a potential federal investigation. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. Wilson slid a document across the table. This is your official statement. You perceived a threat. You responded according to training. The injury was an unfortunate consequence of non-compliance. Reynolds scanned it. What about the store footage? Under review, Wilson replied curtly. Technical issues are being assessed. The phrase hung in the air like something rehearsed. Meanwhile, across town in the hospital, Vanessa sat beside Zaria's bed while her phone buzzed with updates. Captain Davis had already begun quietly gathering information. There are 6 prior excessive force complaints against Reynolds, he said through the secure line. All dismissed. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Patterns, not accidents. Any internal resistance? She asked. A few, Davis replied. One officer flagged inconsistencies in the incident report. He's been reassigned. Vanessa nodded. Keep watching. Back at the station, Officer Thomas Miller sat alone in the locker room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. His reflection in the metal locker door looked unfamiliar. He replayed the moment over and over. The baton swing. The sound. The blood. She's 8, he muttered quietly to himself. He had joined the force, believing he would protect people. Instead, he had stood by while a child was struck. His phone vibrated. A message from internal command. Stick to the statement. No deviations. Miller's hands trembled slightly. The system protects its own. He had heard the phrase before, usually said with pride. Now it sounded different. That evening, local news began airing short clips recorded by bystanders. The footage was shaky, but unmistakable. A little girl. A Baton. A scream. The police department released a carefully worded statement within the hour. Officers responded to a reported theft. During an attempted detainment, the minor sustained an injury after resisting lawful commands. The department is conducting a thorough internal review. Resisting. Lawful. Review. Vanessa watched the broadcast silently from the hospital chair. Zaria slept beside her, a faint crease still visible in her brow even in rest. Kesha paced near the window. They're calling her a suspect, she whispered, disbelief mixing with anger. Vanessa didn't raise her voice. They're buying time, she said calmly. Her phone buzzed again. Captain Davis, it's spreading nationally, he reported. Civil rights attorneys are reaching out. And there's something else. What? There's division inside the department. One of the officers may be willing to talk. Vanessa's gaze shifted toward the dark hospital window. The system protects its own, but sometimes it fractures from within. She looked down at her daughter, brushing her fingers gently against the bandage. They think this will fade, Kesha said softly. Vanessa's eyes hardened, not with rage, but with clarity. No, she replied. They think I'll accept their version of events. Her voice lowered, steady and deliberate. They're about to learn something. Kesha paused. What? Vanessa stood slowly, adjusting her jacket. That I don't fight emotionally. A quiet beat. I fight strategically. And somewhere inside the police department, cracks were already forming. By the 3rd day, the story had split the city in 2. Outside Memphis General, reporters gathered behind barricades. Microphones waited like traps. Protesters stood across the street holding handmade signs. Some demanded justice for Zaria. Others defended the police, insisting the full story hadn't been told. Inside the hospital room, the world felt smaller. Zaria had started speaking more, but she startled easily now. The sound of a cart rolling too fast down the hallway made her flinch. When a uniformed security guard passed her door, she squeezed her mother's hand tightly. They're not coming in here, right? She whispered. Vanessa leaned closer. No, Sunflower. You're safe. But safety had become complicated. Captain Davis entered quietly that evening, closing the door behind him. His usual calm carried a new edge. They're trying to control the narrative, he said. The department claims key surveillance footage corrupted during transfer. Kesha frowned. Corrupted? All of it? Conveniently, Davis replied. Vanessa wasn't surprised. Body cam, she asked. Edited release scheduled. Only partial clips. Vanessa nodded slowly. They're staging it. Davis hesitated. There's more. He handed her a tablet. On the screen was a blog post already spreading online. Military mother exploits daughter's injury for political gain. Kesha's face flushed with anger. That's disgusting. They're seeding doubt, Davis explained. Anonymous sources claiming prior behavioral issues, suggesting Zaria was uncooperative in school. Vanessa stared at the screen without emotion. They weren't just defending an officer. They were attacking her child. Her phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. She answered. A distorted voice spoke softly. Tell your lawyers to back off. Accidents happen. The line went dead. Kesha gasped. They're threatening you? Vanessa set the phone down carefully. They're testing boundaries. Outside, another protest chant rose faintly through the hospital walls. Justice for Zaria. Justice for Zaria. But inside the police department, Chief Wilson held a closed-door meeting. This goes away if we stay unified, he insisted. No side conversations. No independent statements. We protect the badge. Officer Reynolds sat rigidly in his chair. The media pressure had started to chip at him, but pride held him upright. They're turning this into race politics, he muttered. It already is, Wilson replied sharply, and federal eyes are watching. In the back of the room, Officer Thomas Miller remained silent. He had reviewed the original body cam file before it was flagged for technical processing. He knew what it showed. Zaria running, not attacking, not resisting, just scared. Later that night, Miller sat alone in his car in a dark parking structure. His engine idled as he stared at his phone. His thumb hovered over a message draft. This isn't right. Inside the hospital, Vanessa stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the glass. The smear campaign didn't surprise her. The intimidation didn't shake her. What concerned her was escalation, because systems that try to bury truth often panic when exposure grows closer. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message. Unknown number. Not all of us agree with what happened. Parking garage. 1 a.m. Come alone. Vanessa read it twice. Kesha noticed the shift in her expression. What is it? Vanessa locked the phone screen calmly. A crack, she said quietly. A crack in the system. Outside, the chants continued. Inside, Zaria finally fell into deeper sleep. And somewhere in the city, someone inside the department had decided that silence was no longer protection. It was complicity. The parking garage downtown was nearly empty at 1 a.m. Concrete pillars cast long shadows under dim fluorescent lights. Every sound echoed every footstep, every distant car door closing. Colonel Vanessa Wright stepped out of her vehicle alone. She wasn't reckless. 2 plainclothes federal contacts waited 3 blocks away, unseen. She never entered unknown territory without preparation. But tonight wasn't about force. It was about truth. A figure stood near the far end of the garage, partially hidden between 2 columns. Officer Thomas Miller. He looked different out of uniform. Smaller somehow. Less certain. You came alone? He asked quietly. Vanessa stopped several feet away, maintaining distance. You asked for discretion. Miller nodded, glancing around nervously. If they find out I'm here, they won't, Vanessa replied calmly. Speak. He swallowed. I reviewed the original body cam footage before it was flagged for corruption. His voice shook slightly. Your daughter didn't resist. She slipped. She was trying to run back to her aunt. Vanessa didn't interrupt. Reynolds escalated immediately. There was no verbal countdown, no de-escalation attempt. The words hung heavy in the cold air. Miller pulled a small, encrypted drive from his pocket. This is a copy, full footage, time-stamped, unedited. Vanessa took it carefully. There's more, he continued. Internal messages. Chief Wilson ordered tech to isolate frames that made the impact look defensive. The narrative was drafted before the medical report even came back. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. Why are you telling me this? Miller hesitated. Because I joined the force to protect people, not to stand by while a child gets labeled a suspect. He ran a hand over his face. She kept asking for her mum. The memory clearly haunted him. Vanessa studied him for a long moment. Doing the right thing has consequences, she said quietly. I know. And once this becomes public, you will not be shielded. Miller nodded. I'm already not sleeping. A distant engine roared somewhere above them. Both turned instinctively. Then, headlights flooded the far entrance of the garage. A pickup truck screeched in too fast. Miller's face drained of color. He wasn't supposed to know. The truck door slammed open. Officer Brent Reynolds stepped out, movements sharp, agitated. "You think I wouldn't find out?" he shouted, walking toward them. "You think I don't hear things?" Vanessa didn't move. Reynolds' eyes were bloodshot, his composure cracking under pressure. "They're crucifying me out there," he snapped. "Over one split-second decision, you hit a child," Vanessa said evenly. "She ran," he barked. "She was 8. The words cut cleaner than any accusation. Reynolds laughed bitterly. "The system protects its own. You think your rank scares me?" Vanessa's gaze didn't waver. "I think evidence scares you." Reynolds took another step forward, and suddenly red and blue lights lit up the garage entrance. Unmarked federal vehicles blocked both exits. Agents stepped out quickly. Reynolds froze. "What is this?" he demanded. Vanessa didn't look at him. "Insurance," she replied calmly. Agents approached Reynolds, identifying themselves. One informed him of an ongoing federal inquiry into obstruction of justice and excessive use of force. For the first time, real fear flickered across his face. Miller stepped back, breathing hard. Vanessa turned toward him briefly. "You made a choice tonight." Miller nodded silently. As agents escorted Reynolds away, his earlier confidence had vanished. His voice echoed weakly through the garage. This isn't over. But it was no longer his narrative to control. Vanessa watched until the vehicles disappeared. In her hand was the drive that would shift everything. The system protects its own, unless someone inside decides. It shouldn't. By sunrise, the story had shifted. What began as a minor resisting arrest headline was now a federal investigation into civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. News vans lined the street outside police headquarters. Reporters spoke in urgent tones about leaked footage and sealed warrants. Social media had already seen the unedited clip, the impact, the fall, the silence afterward. There was no ambiguity anymore. Inside the department, Chief Wilson's office felt smaller than ever. Papers covered his desk. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. "They have the original file," he muttered, pacing. How did they get the original file? Across town, Vanessa sat in a quiet legal conference room with 2 Department of Justice representatives and her attorney, Maya Brooks. The encrypted drive lay on the table between them. The footage played again. Zaria running. No warning. No escalation attempt. Just fear, and then force. The DOJ investigator paused the video. "This establishes clear, excessive force. But more importantly," he added, flipping to a second file, "these internal messages demonstrate coordinated narrative manipulation." Vanessa remained composed. "What happens next?" "Federal civil rights charges, immediate suspension pending arrest, and we widen the scope to departmental patterns." Vanessa nodded once. It was never just about one officer. Meanwhile, Brent Reynolds sat alone in his living room, television muted but flashing his own image across the screen. Words like federal review and child assault scrolled beneath his face. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Reporters, unknown numbers, missed calls from colleagues who suddenly sounded distant. The doorbell rang sharply. He opened it to find 2 federal agents standing calmly. "Officer Brent Reynolds?" "Yes. You are being placed under arrest pending investigation into excessive use of force and obstruction of justice." The words seemed unreal. "You're arresting me?" he scoffed weakly. "Over media pressure?" "Over evidence," one agent corrected. Reynolds' shoulders stiffened. "The system protects its own, not when it's documented." Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Outside, neighbors watched from behind curtains. Across the city, Officer Thomas Miller sat at his kitchen table staring at the news. He knew his name would surface soon. Internal reviews would follow. His career might never look the same. But for the first time in days, he slept that night. At the hospital, Vanessa stood beside Zaria's bed again. The swelling had begun to reduce. Doctors were cautiously optimistic. "Mommy?" Zaria asked softly. "Yes, Sunflower. Are the bad people gone?" Vanessa considered the question carefully. "They're being held responsible." Zaria processed that slowly. "Does that mean they can't hurt other kids?" Vanessa felt the weight of that. "That's the goal. Her phone vibrated with a message from Maya. Chief Wilson has announced temporary leave. Senator Wells distancing himself publicly. DOJ expanding review. The walls were cracking. What started as one Baton swing had become something larger than the department expected. Back at headquarters, Chief Wilson faced a room of reporters. "We are cooperating fully with federal authorities," he said stiffly. "The actions of one officer do not represent this department." But the footage told a different story. Emails, orders, edits. The hunter who once moved without question was now the one being examined under a microscope. That evening, as the sun dipped low over Memphis, Vanessa stepped outside the hospital for fresh air. Protesters stood quietly now, holding candles instead of signs. One woman approached gently. "Thank you for not backing down." Vanessa looked at the candlelight reflecting in the dark. "I didn't do this alone," she said softly, "because sometimes justice doesn't begin with power. Sometimes it begins when someone refuses to stay silent." And now, the system that once shielded its own was facing something it hadn't prepared for: accountability. The press conference lasted less than 9 minutes, but it ended careers. Chief Richard Wilson stood stiffly behind the podium, cameras flashing non-stop. His usual confident tone was gone. Papers in his hands trembled slightly despite his effort to appear composed. "Effective immediately," he announced. "I am stepping down as Chief of Police pending the outcome of the federal investigation." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Behind him, city officials avoided eye contact with reporters. The mayor had already issued a statement calling for structural reform. Senator Graham Wells released his own carefully worded message, claiming he had no knowledge of internal departmental misconduct. But leaked emails told another story. The Department of Justice had expanded its review beyond one incident. Patterns were emerging: disproportionate force reports, dismissed complaints, internal case closures without review. The system wasn't just cracking anymore. It was collapsing under its own weight. Across town, Officer Brent Reynolds sat in a holding cell, staring blankly at the grey wall in front of him. The confidence he once carried like armor had vanished. No badge, no uniform, no protection. For the first time, he wasn't the authority in the room. He was the subject. Meanwhile, Officer Thomas Miller entered the federal building through a side entrance. His testimony had been formally recorded. He had handed over internal communications, timestamps, and documented inconsistencies. His career in the Memphis Police Department was effectively over, but as he walked back into daylight, he felt something unfamiliar: relief. At Memphis General, Zaria had taken her first short walk down the hallway with assistance. The swelling had reduced significantly, though doctors warned recovery would take time. She moved carefully, holding onto her mother's hand. "Slow steps," Vanessa encouraged gently. Zaria nodded seriously. "Like training?" Vanessa smiled faintly. "Exactly like training." They reached the large hospital window overlooking the city. Zaria watched people moving below. Cars, pedestrians, life continuing. "Mommy," she asked quietly, "are there still bad police somewhere?" Vanessa didn't rush the answer. "There are people everywhere who make bad choices," she said honestly. "But there are also people who choose to do better." Zaria looked up at her. "Like the officer who helped?" "Yes," Vanessa replied softly. "Like him, because change hadn't come from anger alone. It came from cracks inside the structure." That evening, the DOJ officially announced a consent decree investigation into the department's practices. Federal oversight would monitor training, use of force policies, and racial bias procedures. For the first time in years, independent review would exist. Kesha entered the room with her phone in hand. "They're saying this could change policies statewide." Vanessa exhaled slowly. It had started with Candy, with a false accusation, with a baton swung in arrogance. And now, the impact was reaching far beyond Memphis. Later that night, after Zaria fell asleep, Vanessa stood alone by the window again. She wasn't celebrating. Justice wasn't victory. Justice was responsibility. Her phone buzzed an update from Maya. Senator Wells under ethics investigation. More officers coming forward. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. The collapse wasn't chaos. It was exposure. And exposure, though painful, created space for rebuilding. Behind her, Zaria shifted in her sleep. Vanessa walked back to the bedside, brushing a gentle hand over her daughter's braids. They thought they were protecting their own, she whispered quietly. But the truth was stronger than loyalty built on silence. And now, the rebuilding would begin. 6 months later, the air in Memphis felt different, not lighter, but aware. On a quiet Saturday morning, a small community garden opened on the east side of the city. Neighbors gathered around fresh soil beds, children laughing as they planted sunflower seeds in neat little rows. At the center of it all stood Zaria Washington. Her scar was faint now, hidden beneath carefully braided hair. She still attended therapy. Loud sirens still made her pause, but she no longer flinched at every uniform she saw. Healing wasn't instant. It was intentional. Vanessa stood a few feet away, speaking softly with local organizers and city officials. The Department of Justice Oversight Program had already implemented new training protocols. Body cameras were now independently archived. Civilian review boards had real authority for the first time. Reform wasn't perfect, but it was real. Zaria tugged gently on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy! Look!" She pointed at the soil, where her sunflower seeds were buried. "They're going to grow tall," she said confidently. Vanessa smiled. "I know they will." A small crowd gathered as a local pastor invited Zaria to say a few words. She hesitated at first, squeezing her mother's hand. "You don't have to," Vanessa whispered. Zaria looked up. "I want to." She stepped forward, voice soft but steady. "I was scared that day," she admitted. "I thought I did something wrong." The crowd grew quiet, but my mommy told me I didn't, and some police are learning to be better now. Her honesty carried more weight than any speech written by adults. "I don't want other kids to be scared like I was," she finished. Applause followed, not loud or dramatic, but meaningful. Nearby, Officer Thomas Miller watched from a distance in plain clothes. He no longer worked for the Memphis Police Department. His testimony had reshaped his career, but he didn't regret it. Accountability had cost him something, but silence would have cost him more. Across the city, Officer Brent Reynolds awaited trial. Chief Wilson's resignation had been finalized. Senator Wells's ethics investigation was ongoing. The system hadn't disappeared. It had been forced to evolve. Later that afternoon, Vanessa and Zaria walked home together through their neighborhood. The sunlight filtered gently through the trees. "Mommy," Zaria asked thoughtfully, "did they know who you were when they hit me?" Vanessa considered the question. "No," she answered honestly. Zaria tilted her head. Would it have mattered? Vanessa knelt slightly so they were eye level. "It shouldn't matter who someone's mother is," she said softly. "Every child deserves protection. Not because of power, but because they're children." Zaria nodded slowly, processing. They continued walking. At the edge of their yard, small green shoots had already begun pushing through the soil where sunflowers had been planted weeks earlier. Vanessa looked down at them, then at her daughter. "They thought they were silencing one little girl," she said quietly. Zaria smiled faintly. "But I'm still here." Vanessa squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, you are. This story was never just about revenge. It was about responsibility. It was about cracks in a system that once felt untouchable. It was about one mother who refused to let fear define her child's future. And it was about a little girl who learned that bravery doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It means you stand anyway." The sun dipped lower over Memphis, casting golden light across the garden beds. Some battles end in headlines. Others end in seeds planted quietly, growing into something stronger than the harm that tried to bury them.